Good morning. It is 9:34 a.m. on Sunday, August 25th, 2019. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. It is Sunday, and that means that I'm continuing my rewatch of Gravity Falls, Season 2, Episode 18, Weirdmageddon, Part 1. The series finale begins. So this is kind of exciting because this has been a show where, although it did have an overarching plot that would sort of gradually advance here and there, like many half-hour shows, it was also still, in many ways, kind of a reset every week sort of thing. It was a monster of the week type of show where more or less at the end of every episode you reset things to about where they were. But starting at this point, well, technically the end of the last one, it's big finale time. Everything's changing. We're just going full out. And these are expensive for animated shows, in particular because you're changing all of the scenery, you're changing the way all the characters look. It's the animation becomes much more expensive in that regard. But it's exciting to build up to a big finish. And I think in many ways, when I was first watching the show, I was pleasantly surprised by how far the series finale, the whole Weirdmageddon arc was willing to go. Because in many ways, partly just because for what is otherwise mostly a kids show, I mean, certainly adults can enjoy it, but it's more, it's more focused on the kids. And yet the whole Weirdmageddon arc gets fairly serious. There's a couple of, it actually just makes me think about how, because there's certainly horror elements, but they are kid-friendly horror elements, I suppose, in the sense that they are definitely supposed to be horror elements, but just not quite as intense as you might find in like an actual horror movie. But in any event, we begin with, starting right up where we left off, which was, oh no, the portal is open, Weirdmageddon begins. It's the end of the world, or at least the world we knew. So we see Bill Cipher going through his whole transformation where he gets a physical body as opposed to being this sort of mental construct only in existing within people's minds that he was before. And we see him, transforming. We get a little cutaway to Blandon Blandon, the time traveler, who cuts away, setting up his return later in the episode. We watch Mabel unconscious still after Bill Cipher made her fall asleep at the end of the last episode, and then trapping her within this sort of pink magical bubble thing, which we learn more about in the next episode. Because this is the only full-length episode where Mabel doesn't have any lines, because she is completely within this this bubble. We don't see her at all. But we also have, everyone in town is looking up in fear because this is changing everything. We see one of the horror elements I'm speaking of when we see the Pacifica Northwest's family, and we see him, the father show up, and as we had gotten hints of in Northwest Mansion Mystery, he immediately proposes to Bill, oh, hey, I'll help you. I'll be one of your horsemen of the apocalypse. But Bill basically doesn't actually need people at all anymore. And so he basically reveals his own, lack of interest in that offer by switching the orifices of his face around. So like he has an eye instead of his mouth, where his eyes were become ears, and then there are noses where his ears were. And it's only on screen for a moment, but it's pretty messed up. And I remember seeing that when I first watched this episode and just going, oh, damn. This they're they're coming for us hard in this episode here. But we also have Bill bringing in his friends, lieutenants from the Nightmare Realm, and they're all introduced. One of them is 8-Ball, who there's a funny bit of trivia that 8-Ball had been appeared as a skeleton in the opening theme song, and so then when we get our remix theme song, we've got a joke on that. But then there's a whole bunch of them. They're all pretty weird. It's a little bit, it's kind of just setting up side characters for there to be, in classic adventure design style, you need to have some henchmen to defeat on your way to the big boss fight. So we're introducing a bunch of those. And then, of course, that leads to him. He's taken over the town. He's like making the water tower come alive, and all sorts of weird, crazy things are happening. And then we get the remixed theme song, which is pretty great. And it's one of the things that you can do when a show does have a consistent opening credits theme, is that when it's familiar, you can mix it up and get a significant effect with that. So when we have the Bill Cipherized opening credits, that's a lot of fun, just watching him take over everything. And it re-emphasizes this whole idea that everything's different now. In the meantime, Dipper and Ford, what can we do? And Ford talks to Dipper about how it's not clear what they can do. It might be impossible, but that's kind of what being a hero is you got to try. You've got to try to do something. And it's interesting that neither of them realize that Mabel was tricked into handing over the rift voluntarily. I can't remember for sure if this comes back up later, but I think it may. But it's just because they have lines that specifically say it must have just cracked in her backpack. I think that maybe that comes back up next time. But regardless, I mean, being tricked, as we discussed last time, they didn't tell her. Right? They didn't include her in the secret of what this thing was, so how could she have known? In any event, we have them, doing everything they can, but there's so many obstacles to struggle with now. There's the weirdness waves and these weird madness bubbles, and we have another cutaway where we see that Seuss needs to become a hero of the apocalypse himself when his abuelita is turned into a recliner chair, but one like from Pee-wee's Playhouse who can talk and has a face and everything, and just tells him that, she'll be fine. He should go off and help people. And so we're checking in with all the other various characters. We see Stan yelling at Gompers the goat until Gompers is turned into a gigantic goat by the weirdness wave. And I think that's the last time we see Stan in this episode. Lots of little trivia bits as we check in on various characters. The arcade, he gets hit by the weirdness wave, and we see Rumble McSkirmish, the video game fighter character, who comes back out. And then we go to the prison where Gideon has been. We see that he has continued to make everybody around him irrationally devoted to him due to his cuteness, even though one of the prison psychologists seems to be concerned that his artwork is still very focused on, revenge and that sort of thing. But they're released, and that sets up, we get a little bit of a hint of what's coming there. that they're out there escaping. Ford has one last idea. He's going to try shooting Bill with this quantum destabilizer. And it's a nice red herring. It's a nice fake out because it sets us up to think that's the challenge, right? We need to pull off this plan. But then just to bad luck with a weirdness wave making the clock tower bell, "Oh, I'm alive now," just distracts Ford just enough that he misses with this, MacGuffin weapon. There's a nice creepy moment where he basically shoots a hole in Bill Cipher's little top hat, and it's revealed that the top hat is not just like a separate hat that's hollow inside. It has like flesh inside it, but it's obviously a glancing blow. Immediately regenerates, and then of course it's all gone from there. Bill turns him into a back scratcher statue, and Dipper is now, and basically challenges Dipper like, "Oh, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? Here, give me your best shot. Give me." And Dipper is helpless. He doesn't know what to do. He kind of panics and just tries to punch him, but obviously that doesn't work. And it seems like all is lost, right? Bill Cipher burns the journals that have been this thing throughout the whole series. And it's really, this is what I'm talking about when I was impressed with, not only the horror elements of some of that stuff. Bill Cipher is just a really cool villain, having that sort of very glib tone, even as he's doing all of these horrific things. And also just how far this story was willing to go in terms of this all is lost feeling. Because, Dipper has to run away from some of these lieutenants that they were going to try to eat him. And he basically just has to go into hiding. What can he do, right? And we get a time skip 3 days into Weirdmageddon, which is interesting just because, 3 days, seems like it would be a lot to survive for 3 days in this scenario that we see. But then there's also lots of other things that seem like people are pretty much going full Mad Max already. So we get the time skip where we see, from the news reporter on the TV tells us how long it's been, sums up a little bit of what's going on. We see a lot more of these floating eyeball things turning the townsfolk into statues. We see Dipper still trying to reach Mabel or Stan on the walkie-talkie. It's not clear why he thinks he would reach Stan on it. He's just he doesn't know where Stan or Mabel are. He doesn't know what to do. He's been on the run. It's pretty awful. The situation looks really bad. He doesn't know what to do. He is doing everything he can. He evades the horrifying, sweaty, one-armed monstrosity is the official name of this weird monster that is basically like a 40-something white guy, balding head with an arm growing out of the top of it that just drags itself along with the one arm and is basically just like, hey, I'm talking to you. Come on and get in my mouth right now. Come on. Hey, don't walk away from me. That's rude. It's ridiculous, but it's kind of fun. As you know, a bit of trivia about the episode actually is that originally that character was voiced by Louis C.K., but they redubbed him after, some of that stuff came out. In any event, Dipper evades the horrifying, sweaty, one-armed monstrosity and gets to the mall where he meets up with Wendy, who is also apparently hanging out there in the mall with Toby Determined, who has rated the Hot Topic equivalent and become Bodacious T in this full punk ridiculous outfit. That's pretty great. But Wendy is in her element. She's like, oh yeah, my dad made sure we had apocalypse training every Christmas. Which is very silly, but also feels very plausible based on what we know of her character and her family. And so, but with a new ally, okay, maybe there starts to feel like, well, what can we do? Is there something? And she basically, tells him, like, what you need is Mabel back, because the two of you together are something magic. And, that's kind of what we're feeling too, just without Mabel. And so they realize she must be in that big pink bubble because it has the same symbol on it from her sweater. And they have to get there. So they have to get cars. But, oh no, the place where they try to get a car, this is where Gideon reappears. Turns out he has been deputized by Bill, part of the deal he made. He gets, ownership of the bubble that contains Mabel, making Mabel his, so he says, in exchange for making sure that he takes care of Dipper and, by extension, Wendy. And it's very much sort of the whole Mad Max scenario, right? Except that he's in, of course, a totally glammed out, glittery, fringy cowboy outfit. It's very silly. It's like Boss Hogg meets Elton John. And in any event, and in fact, Wendy actually goes, "Oh my God, he's gotten folksier." It's very silly. But of course, this sets up a whole, chase scene where, they escape. They're driving the cars. They have to drive through some of these madness bubbles, which is fun just because it gives them an excuse to render the characters in all these different animation styles, including one that's live action, where Dipper and Wendy are, briefly portrayed by their actual voice actors, which is kind of fun. But they're escaping. They make a jump, but the car crashes. And again, this is where it's interesting seeing how far the show is willing to go, is that both Wendy and Dipper seem pretty messed up from this. Like, we don't see like obvious, like there's not gaping wounds or anything like that, but they look very bad, injured, in terms of actually bruised and just acting injured. But thankfully Seuss shows up. Oh no, they're surrounded anyway. And it looks bad, but this is where we get a crucial turning point because, I briefly want to call back that they did start to set up that even the prisoners were questioning Gideon's interpretation of this whole thing of like, you love this girl, so you're keeping her trapped in a magical prison bubble? Is that really, like, what is that? And I especially wanted to call that back just because Gideon kind of says, "Enough of your philosophy, Ghost Eyes," and he goes, "Well, it was my major." And that's funny. Yeah. Anyway, we get a moment where Dipper talks about the lesson he learned in terms of his relationship with Wendy, and the fact that he's willing to talk about it with Wendy right there is growth on his part. This idea that you can't make someone love you if they don't. All you can do is try to be more of a person that's worthy of love. And he tries to reach out to Gideon with that to say, if you love Mabel, think about this. Would Mabel appreciate any of this? Would she approve of a person who would do this? Of course not, and you know it. And he actually reaches through, and there's a crack with Gideon where Gideon's basically like, he knows that's all true, but could he stand up to Bill? And then that's where he gets the backup from all of his, prison inmate gang, where they're like, "Come on, Gideon, you can do it. We believe in you. Besides, we'd much rather fight a chaos god than a bunch of kids." and so it's like, yeah. And so Gideon, of all people, turns to the side of good, going to go distract Bill's minions so that Wendy and Dipper can get to this bubble where Mabel is. And that's where we have our cliffhanger as Dipper and Mabel prepare to enter this bubble and save Mabel, and they go in saying, this was a prison created by Bill, so it could be anything inside. Let's find out. And they go in, flash of light. That's where we get the cliffhanger of this episode. So it's all happening. Everything, like the show is it's not leaving anything in the shelf at this point, right? They're bringing out all the works, and it's pretty exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. But I will talk to you next week about Weirdmageddon Part 2. Also, just as a brief note, because we're coming in, we're starting to get close to the end of Gravity Falls for this rewatch, I'm starting to think a little bit about what show I might want to do next after Gravity Falls. And I've got a couple that I'm considering, including doing Legend of Korra, which is the sequel series to Avatar: The Last Airbender, which of course was the first of these rewatch series that I did. I'm considering Cowboy Bebop. I thoroughly enjoyed the recent Invader Zim movie on Netflix, and so the Invader Zim cartoon could be a lot of fun. I'm still thinking about it, but if you watch these and enjoy them, maybe let me know what you think. And in the meantime, I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.